Welcome to the Leadership to Wealth podcast. I'm your host, Neil D'Souza, and I've got a special guest for you today. This man has been in the area of financial planning for over 20 years. He has got 2 degrees, over 9 designations. He has written numerous articles, been interviewed, done podcasts. He is a teacher. He is a writer. He is a commentator. He has done so much in the financial planning industry, and he is an expert also in practice management and fintech. Our guest today, Jason Pereira.
Well, Jason, of course, thank you for coming on the show today. Really appreciate you being willing to share your wisdom with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having
me. Well, there's a quote that you said. I'd like to get right into it and ask you this question, okay. And that was, when you're constantly being held back, never lose sight of what could be if you were set free.
I said that, or who said that?
You said that.
God, you might want to Google that and see if I falsely failed to attribute that to someone else. I will say that quote, I'm actually going to see where you found that. I'm actually going to say that quote is quite honestly been very indicative of my life in many capacities, right? And I think it largely stems from the system that most young people come into when they're in the financial services industry, right? So you come in, you're like all excited to be working for a big bank, XYZ, whatever else it is. You got the big logo on your card, all this other stuff. And then you find out that despite the fact they probably told you were going to do all this wonderful stuff, make this money and help all these people. Oh yeah, what we really care about is this target and this, and you doing this and this, and then whatever else. And it's just like, well, 2 types of people emerge from that. There are those, or 3 types. There are those who just do it without questioning. There are those who do it and realize that this is really not like in the benefit of people. And then there are those who basically realize that and just still embrace it, right? And last category I don't want to know is human beings. But the other ones, the ones in the middle, which is the ones I account for, the ones where like, oh God, this is the wrong way to do things. Try to figure out, there are aspects of the business you loved or you liked because that's what brought you into it in the first place. And you basically start asking yourself questions and start looking for people to learn from as to how you can do something different. So you oftentimes will find yourself especially in the early days, constrained, unable to do what you believe is right or what you think is right or what you think is best. But putting yourself, understanding what's possible if you already get out of that environment and building your career such that you can get out of the environment and into something where it is possible. That is something that you shouldn't lose sight of, because if not, I always say, like, my industry is, shoot up more promising young people and spit them out than we could ever count, simply because they just, didn't want to sell more insurance to their parent, right? Like it is what it is, but it's, there's, and that's not just indicative of only this industry. I mean, I think there's a lot of industries where you go in, you're like, wow, this is not in the best interest of the people we're serving. Yeah. And frankly, that's not to say that you can't do the right job in that industry. It's just that company's made a number of strategic choices that it's not the case. But don't let it crush your soul. Find a way to eke out those wins and find a way to eventually just no longer have to deal with that pressure over time.
Wow. Absolutely. Well, so let's back up then a little bit, because you actually have always wanted to be in the financial industry. Am I right?
Well, I'm going to say I didn't know what the heck I wanted to do with my life.
Okay.
until like I was never the kid who said he wants to be a fireman, right? Like I just I don't know what I want to do. But when I was approaching the end of my high school tenure, I knew that I didn't want to go away to university, spend money on a degree in the wrong field, right? Because that could be a very costly mistake. So I decided to take up a co-op term, and being a young male, and liking money, the financial industry appealed to me, right? So I got placed with one of the largest brokers in the country at one of the big downtown Toronto law firms, and I thought it was awesome to start, right? And only through experience and seeing, what the bank's goals were and what the priorities were and where the clients were getting, that I realized to myself, like, this is not actually designed to help them accomplish anything. Like we would talk about it and whatever else, but certain things that I would do. Like I would see, I would start at one point. I started doing the financial plans there, even though I probably wasn't fully qualified to do that. But I started doing some financial planning there. I saw the power that those things had. That a couple of decisions could literally change the course of their financial future. And yet, this was a afterthought product. This was the, do you want fries with that? At the time, to give him credit, he was one of the few advisors providing that service to a lot of clients, whereas the vast majority of people there just never even touched it. And that's where I kind of, at the time when I was kind of getting to the point where I stayed on post high school into university, and then after university, I was starting to not even recognize it myself that I was very dissatisfied with the industry, very unhappy with it. But that was one of the things that I gleamed onto is, hey, like this is where tangible benefit can be born. And I kind of took that nugget and ran with it.
Wow. So how were you able to get through those years because you identified it very quickly, some of these shortfalls or perhaps
it was
pitfalls?
quickly. It was years. Like I was there for over 5 years in some capacity.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was little by little. It was death by a thousand cuts. But towards the end, I mean, to his credit, my boss recognized and actually sat down with me and said, is our relationship coming to an end? And I was kind of struck by it. I was like, no, I'm just kind of feeling out of it, and I'll get back and do all this. But I think he saw that I was done. He saw that I was done, and I didn't realize it. So, but it was death by a thousand cuts. It was seeing a lot of stuff that I was just not pleased with as a human being and morally, whatever else. I'm not saying him, but just in general, like with the industry. And came to that conclusion. But when I and frankly, one of the things I will say that kind of kept me in the industry was that the market was garbage when I graduated. Like we were in the middle of a post.com recession, and so the job market wasn't very good. And I got an opportunity to leave that and start a independent financial planning or investment practice. And only when I did that did I start realizing that, okay, I understand mechanics of this business, but I actually don't understand how to structure a business whatsoever. Or like, I understand the investment piece and I understand some of the planning piece, but how do I actually like service people in a way that's mutually beneficial? That started a very long, education and a lot of soul searching and asking questions that basically led to kind of the model I wanted to create.
Wow. Okay. So I have to ask a question. Roughly how old were you at that point when you're like, you're on your own and you're moving in that direction?
Well, let's put it this way: 17 when I started at Scotia. Well, I give it away. When I started at the brokerage firm, and then left there at, so what would that be? 22. Left there at 22. Started with another firm with a senior partner. With that relationship fell apart after 5 years. So 27 years old, I went back to zero. Right. So
wow.
Built that from little something into a medium sized something, and then because that relationship was doomed, basically went back to zero.
Wow. How did, what was that like, having to start out again at 27?
Well, the timing was interesting because it was 2007. So at first it was okay. And then it's just like, oh my God, what did I do to myself? Like, yeah, exactly. And yeah, it was nerve wracking, right? It was nerve wracking, to go to not be able to count on a paycheck for months on end. Right. But that's entrepreneurship. I'll never understand, people who seem to think I'm just going to hang a shingle and money's going to flow in the door. That's not how any business works. If that happens, you're very lucky.
Right. Okay. So since you mentioned that, I've got to ask about that, because I hear a lot of younger people that are getting into business. There's almost a culture going on right now where people are almost excited to get into business because they're going to make millions of dollars in business. But I think there's something missing there for what that's like to actually get into business and to have to go through those lean years, but still planting all the way along. Can you say something to that?
Yeah, I'll say a couple of things. First, to your statement about there's kind of a culture, and I think we're looking at the minority of people who speak out loudly, right? I think the majority of people I talk to are much more level-headed, but those loud voices overwhelm, and the number of times I come across statements by young individuals who are just like, the delusion on how much money they can make and how quickly is striking, right? Like, just literally, they literally seem to think that they could become a billionaire in no time. And it's like, if it was legitimately that easy on a planet of 7 billion people, do you really think that we'd have so few billionaires that we had to make a list? Like, like that's really it. The list of billionaires is a couple pages in a magazine, right? Do you really think that it's that easy, and that whatever easy thing, and that if it's that easy, that the rest of us just opted not to become billionaires, right? So, that's the reality check. There is so the counterpoint to that is, yes, I have had conversations where people ask me to speak to someone who's looking to start a business or get into a business, and I will tell you, getting into business for yourself is the most bipolar thing you could ever opt into. Okay. There are days where you are so energetic and ready to literally tackle the universe. It is nuts. And then the next day you're like, oh my God, what have I done to myself? Like, my life is so much harder. Here's what it comes down to. Let's look at the actual statistics of this. Okay. The average business in this country, right? And I've gotten this from StatsCan years ago. Incorporated or unincorporated, works more than a 40-hour work week. Right? Does not work less, works more. Okay. Don't get me wrong. When you look at the successful business owners who take time off, that's different. What you're ignoring there is the graveyard of evidence. You're ignoring the graveyard of businesses that failed. Okay. And that is a graveyard that is bigger than the number that are living. Right. You have to keep that in mind. So the hours are greater. And when you actually break down the hourly comp, it is actually, in most cases, on average, worse than the average paid employee. So, that's not to say that you can't do exceptional things and earn exceptional money. But, every couple of years, there's some sort of trend or some sort of fad or some sort of thing. I've had people sit down with me and say, like, oh yeah, I came in this money, I want to buy a AAA franchise. And my response is, which franchises do you think you're going to buy? And they're like, like a Starbucks. I'm like, that's not a franchise operation of corporate shops. It's like, or Tim Hortons. I'm like, there's a multi-year wait list. I'm not even sure if it's open, right? They don't even, there's an assumption, right? There's an assumption. There's not a reality. And then they get smacked with the reality. And it's just like, oh, this is difficult, right? Most businesses do not fail because the people running them are stupid. Most businesses fail because they failed for any number of reasons. Maybe the person's running is stupid, like that's possible. But the point is that, life is not easy. Entrepreneurship is not easy, right? There is a reason why so few people get to, and actually I'll say this as well too, just like in athletics, right? Every industry, the majority of money is earned by the vast minority of people, the top performers in that industry. So when you just look at the top of the pyramid and think to yourself, that's going to be me, right? That's the same thing as when you're an 8-year-old kid saying, I'm going to play in the NHL, not paying attention to the massive pyramid of human beings and bodies it took to self-select in for the tiniest group of individuals. Not to say you can't do it. Not to say you can't do it, but it's, odds are difficult on success, period.
Well, I think one of the things that we see is that with social media, there's a plethora of these people that are out there talking about their successes and how they've done this and done that, and on top of that,
are they selling webinars on how to do exactly what they did?
I'm sure.
Yeah, what's interesting is not everybody can make their money by selling webinars on success, right? Like, that's called a pyramid scheme.
Yes, but I think there's also we've seen so much since the days of Kim Kardashian, and if anyone ever says, what does she actually do for a talent? There's so many of these.
Humanity. She manipulates you to care about someone you should never care about. That's it.
Right. And I think there's something to be said about the people that are able to just quite frankly entertain with they're the only value that is being provided is pure entertainment and escapism. And there's something to be said about that without trashing all of these individuals. But I think that far too many people see how seemingly easy it was for them and think, well, there's nothing for me to be able to do that and get there.
Well, I mean, was it easy? She was born to the right family, had the right friends, had an unfortunate video, but like there's, the reality is that life is a series of, we can talk about the concept of privilege versus non-privilege. That's fine. But the reality is that even the most successful people in the world have to attribute some of their actual fortune to luck, right? Like that's the reality of it. We're lucky to be born to the right people. We're lucky to be born to the right places. We're lucky to be in the right places in time. Malcolm Gladwell talked about this in his book Outliers, where he talked about how when you've had the richest people in history at different time periods, their birthdays all cluster around a very short period because they all come to maturity at a time when an opportunity exists that lots of people basically were exposed to, yet they were the winners of that opportunity. The railroad barons were all born within a very short period of time. The oil barons, like the Gettys and the Rockefellers, were all born within a relatively short period of time. I mean, different eras because different locations. But the example of Bill Joy at Sun Microsystems, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, their birthdays are within like a 3 to 4 year span, right? They all came of age in an era when they were young, that they could basically be early adopters and early understanders of digital technology, of computers, and they rode that wave, right? And just like the social media millionaires, and I'm not exactly sure what the difference between Jack Dorsey and Zuckerberg is in age, but I'm guessing it's not huge.
That's interesting. That's really interesting, because one of the things that I recognized out of the 2007, 2008, specifically the market crashes, was I was actually old enough to be able to see it and be able to study it and understand it. And so, or somewhat, there's a whole world behind that. Good luck. And I'm sure there's lots of articles on the conspiracies behind all of that, but just to be able to watch it. And so now this time around, last year, forget about all the conspiracy theories. We saw quite an amazing dip in the market, right, as a result of COVID. And what a lot of people were asking, what's going to happen? And now I'll share this. I actually just pulled out the playbook from 2008 and said, okay, here's what they did. They did this, then they did this, then they did this. And, and just kept kind of discussing. And people were like, oh, that's amazing. How did you know that this is what was going to happen? I said,
because they were going to do it again.
Yeah, exactly. And so I really feel like we're still in that opportunity, even though a lot of the opportunities, ask anyone in real estate, if they bought last year, they've made anywhere from $100,000 and up if they had bought real estate last year, because that just went booming. But I would say that we're still in a huge boom moving forward, just out of the dearth of last year. Can you say anything to that? What's your thoughts on that matter?
Well, I think if you want to look wrong, just make a prediction. Is it hard to say that if, in fairness to your prediction and the wisdom of it, the reality is it hard to say that governments would just turn on a tap if there was a massive structural worldwide crisis? No. What other choice do they have? Right? Like we saw the Great Depression before. We know how that plays out. Right. Mm-hmm. So the reality is that's not, would anyone have basically that would happen to housing in Canada? No, I don't think they would have. I mean, there's always those who think that real estate grows at double digits every year, but I mean, that's because they choose to look at a chart that's only this wide as opposed to this wide.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Like when you look at the actual numbers that whatever numbers we can get going back 100 plus years, it typically is tied to inflation. We've had a bunch of various reasons for why that's happened. So I will never make a prediction of extrapolation. At the end of the day, there's the old saying on the market of being a short-term voting machine and a long-term weighing machine. I think that applies to a lot of things in life. And what I mean by that is anything can happen in a very short period of time. And I think we've seen that a couple times in our lifetime, right? We are living our children's history is the way is the saying, right? But long run, as long as Western society continues to exist, right, certain things happen. Like, companies continue to exist that make money. People continue to need homes to live in. I'm not saying that justifies prices, but am I crazy to say that I think in next year the market will be up, 10%? Maybe. Am I crazy to say that we will be up substantially in 25 years? No, I'm not. I'm just basically playing the odds that are basically, short of a massive structural crisis to society on the whole. It's a pretty safe bet. So the reality is, we spend, and so it's a very monumental day because Robinhood became public today, a company that I despise on countless levels. And the short-termism of wealth, which is basically, I think, hit a culminating, it just hit a short-termism of wealth creation in terms of mindset, which I think hit a maximum for like fever pitch in the last year, because everybody was home and didn't have much to do, and they had these stimulus checks, and if they were lucky enough to keep their job, they were still making good money, but they had nowhere to spend it. So what are you going to do? Like, oh, I got to invest and deploy this capital somewhere, right? Whether you were trading crypto, trading stocks, or trading housing, short of listening to your advisor and actually making long-term decisions, there was just this overwhelming noise on short-termism. And we have seen that happen. And that we have seen this dance throughout history. It never ends well. Right. So, I mean, if you want to give information, if I want to give you advice to your listeners, always have a very, very long-term mindset.
Yeah.
Right. Simple example. I have more designations than I can count. And, people are just like, oh, like I would do that, but I want to do this, I want to travel this, I want to do whatever else, right? There's a cost. There's a cost to all this, right? And at the end of the day, right, it's like, now I sit back and look at, compared to my peers, I'm in the upper 0.001% in terms of credentialing, and that pays dividends in countless ways. And yet everybody else is like, oh man, how'd you do that? Like, I don't understand. It's like, well, I did it all before I had children. I did it all before I did all this other stuff. And you guys could have done the same thing, but you chose not to, right? Like, it's, at the end of the day, the success of tomorrow is paid for through the sacrifice of today. And no one wants to really realize that. And the top performers in any field I've ever met, athletics, medicine, business, if you ask them what it was like in their early days and how it took to get there, just massive sacrifice. Everything. Oh, that guy's so lucky. Good story about Jack Nicklaus. One time someone said to him, and just on a bad day, oh man, I wish I could swing a club like you. And he's like, no, you don't. And he's like, oh no, I'm serious. I wish I could swing a club like you. He's like, no, you don't. And the guy's like, what's wrong with you? He goes, do you want to basically be out there in the rain? You want to be out there on a daily basis in the rain and in the snow and whatever the hell else is going on, swinging a club until your hands crack and bleed on a daily basis to get my swing? Is that the price you're willing to pay? Right. And that's the problem, is we all see the payoff. We don't see the cost, and the cost can be immense.
Yeah. Yeah. Why would someone want to do it then?
I think it's a very good question. I think that the people who typically I see perform at those levels are actually passionate and deeply interested in what they're doing. Like, that's what it is. Like, if you're not doing something where you actually want to be the best at what you're doing, and you're willing, and you actually are just curious and just want to get better and just build that better widget, right? Like you're not going to get there. You're not going to pay that price. You're going to end up somewhere in the middle, which, that's fine. It's respectful. But if you want to be in that upper echelon, like, I have a friend who, got laid off his job 5 years ago. Okay. Yeah. And he basically, did some other stuff. And then finally, he got some other stuff in real estate, and then finally said, I'm just gonna become an agent, because he was actually feeding so much business to agents that he thought, whatever, this is dumb. And then when he got into it, he's like, you know what? I really love helping people find the thing that they love and the place they're going to raise their kids. And I have never seen, like, I knew he was a hustler, but man, you can tell he loved what he was doing, because the marketing, the hustle, all of it. He even landed a spot on a TV show. But now, like, in less than 6 years, he's a top 1%. He's going to be a top 1% agent in the country, right?
Wow.
But I have been there for the entire ride. He's a personal friend of mine. I have seen the sacrifice. I have seen the amount of work. Yeah. The average agent in the city of Toronto sells, less than 3, like more than 35% of them sell less than 3 homes per year. No, like, of those, less than 20, more like 20% sell less than 1. So, like, meanwhile, this guy, had sold by mid-year almost 50, right? That is not by accident. That is because of just absurd amounts of time put in effort and work and networking and staying in contact with people. So, that's the reality, is success. Watch the Tiger Woods documentary, watch the Michael Jordan documentary. Look at the price those guys paid to get where they got.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting to see I think we actually have the availability of this knowledge far more now than ever before to find out what did the elite do to get there. Yeah. And so we have it at our fingertips to be able to do that. And but we're always trying to
But
skirt it for some
we're
reason.
always just want to watch them in their moment of glory. We want to see, we want to see, the likes of like Jordan hit the buzzer beater, right?
Yeah,
I think of like there was an article on I remember an article on Roy Jones years ago in Sports Illustrated about how his dad used to put him up against kids 2 to 3 years older than him when he was like not even 10 years old in boxing. Like,
right.
just a really, like, the stories were just a really hard man, and he ground him into the rock that he is, right? And you think about that, even still the Williams sisters, you listen to the stuff that their parents put them through, and so it's like, like the dad literally made them into what they are, and there's a price to be paid for all of that, right?
Yeah.
And it comes down to maybe they're happy with that, right? But there's a lot of people on the way who are just not willing to pay that price, or that price
Yeah.
drives them to the point of depression, right? Like it.
Yeah.
So the reality is that, yeah, success is wonderful. Everybody wants success. We're talking about this in the middle of the middle Olympics, right? Like, what's her face? Penny. Oh God, I'm freezing on her name. The swimmer. Yeah. So anyway, so she just won. Is now Canada's most celebrated medalist ever, and funnily enough, the Jerry D tweeted out, and still the second best athlete in her house because her brother plays in the NHL, which is hilarious. In her parents' house. So she's like 20 something years old, like 21, 22 years old. She's still got multiple Olympics left to go. I can't imagine how much time that woman spent in the pool. I cannot imagine. Like, she probably, is probably a raisin at all times, but we don't see that. We see the moment of glory on the podium, and that's what we want.
Yeah.
But you're right. We could very easily, with a lot of these people where they've done these long documentaries, watch that and see that, wow, that's quite the price to pay to get where you are.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's it's actually amazing when you look at it and consider, is that something that you want to do? And I actually don't bemoan anyone for not wanting to do that.
No.
Honestly, I think you're probably better off if you don't wish or have that desire. But if you do, take it on with eyes wide open.
Well, I think
understand what's ahead of you.
If you have the desire without the willingness and the desire to basically commit yourself to it, and actually sincerely enjoy the ride, right? Like, you have to enjoy that. Like, you have to get something out of that. If that's you, but you're still delusional enough to think you're going to get there, that's, there's a saying on, stress is caused when basically expectations exceed reality, right?
Right.
And that you're on the wrong side of that equation. Right. But the other side of it is, and there's nothing wrong with it. Like, there's 7 point something billion people in this world, right? There's, maybe a handful of people that can be universally named by a billion people in the world, right? You do not have to be like the number of massively successful clients I have who you would never know that they're at the top of their game in their industry, right? Like, maybe they're known by a tiny little circle. Like, people are like, oh yeah, everybody knows you in finance. I'm like, that's nice. That's a tiny little universe, a tiny little pond in Canada that I am recognized by a subset of people.
Right.
But at the end of the day, like, you don't have to be that. No one has to be that. Someone will end up there, but frankly, find the things that are going to make you happy. And if, the reality is some of these people are paying the price in, personal relationships, delaying having children, delaying getting married, delaying doing a lot of things that they can't, while they're young, because they're paying that price. Right. That's the cost of admission for that level of success.
Did you have to delay those treasures in your life to be able to get the all those designations and to get where you are?
I think that there was definitely a cost to it, right? Like, when especially when you go out and start a business from zero at age 27 after earning okay money for a while. But the reality is that, like, there were certain delays in life. Like, and especially when you start a business and you go back to zero and you got to invest money into it. And I was finishing my MBA at the same time. So it was all money out, no money in. Right. So other friends were buying houses. Can I afford to? Absolutely not. Right. There were certain things that were put off in life. Did I pay that on the personal side? Probably on some looking back, because, there's certain aspects of myself that I had to work on that were put off because I was so busy with other stuff. Right. So, yeah, there's absolutely. There's certain things where, I look way ahead in certain aspects of life, but other aspects, it's like, oh, you only did that then, right? Like, it is different than the other people I know. And we just had a different priority stack, and that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can say definitely for myself, what I found was, because I've got 4 kids, and along the way, there were times where I did not give them the time that many other parents are able to give them. And there were times where, quite frankly, I just wasn't present for what was
Yeah.
going on. And that's something that every person, every individual has to deal with and decide what they're doing. I look back and go, okay, I should have spent more time. I should have figured out things, whatever. I did what I did. Going forward is what am I doing right now?
Yeah,
Right.
but
Is
I'll
the
also say,
decision
in
in front of me.
fairness, I mean, like, let's
Yeah.
talk about, parenting. I like to say meditation is the exercise of failing repeatedly and
Yes.
just forgiving yourself. To
Yes.
some level, to a lesser extent, parenting is that same thing, because no matter,
Yeah.
you can always be better at it. You can always be
Yeah.
better at it.
Absolutely.
And the level, I think the difference is the level of guilt you feel for it is substantially greater than, hey, my golf swing sucks. I feel zero guilt over that. But, I don't spend enough time with my kids. I feel
Yeah.
terrible.
Right. Right. Absolutely. It's interesting. You were just mentioning about the Olympics and that, and my daughter was
Alexiak, that was her name. Thank God. Ah, came back to me.
yeah.
Penny Alexiak. There it is.
Yes. My daughter was into gymnastics, and from a young age, and she would train all the time. Go to school, come home, train. She got to a point where we were now looking to, all right, we're going to have to flip the schedule. You're going to have to start training full time and study in between. And there was that pivotal moment, because she had to decide, is this what I want to continue doing going forward? Now, she ended up deciding not to. And, as a father, there's that small moment where you're like, oh, because you could see greatness. But at the same time, I can look at it and go, man, the price that she would have had to pay to go from that point on is an immense price. And if you're not prepared
And
for
you
it,
would
if
too,
that's
for that
not
matter.
something. Yeah.
And
Oh,
friend
absolutely.
in that exact situation. His daughter made that choice, and his life. I mean, luckily his job is flexible enough that he can work around it. But his life is based around her training schedule, right?
Right.
So the reality is that it's also a tremendous. Like the other piece that be said that I haven't acknowledged to date is the sacrifices of those around you, right? Like any business owner. I mean, the conversation I had actually with my local MP when the feds were changing the rules on small business, trying to do a bunch of misguided stuff that they ended up walking back a lot of. He was a business owner himself, and he was livid, despite it being his party. And he basically said, like, I think because there was this issue about splitting income with spouses if they received dividends and that not being fair. And he basically said, like, the reality is that the people who came up with this under the delusion that these people do it by themselves. Said, there is no successful business owner with a family whose spouse hasn't made tremendous sacrifices for them to get there. Right.
Yeah.
I look at my own spouse, my children picture right over there, and the disproportionate amount of the parental work that she does compared to me, massively disproportional. I give her nothing but credit for it. There is no way my business would be where it is today with me having children if I couldn't count on her for that. And God forbid anything ever to happen to her, I can tell you my career trajectory changes overnight simply because I would have to reprioritize my time in that direction.
Wow.
Right. So the reality is there is huge sacrifices by those people around you.
Well, you just put a bullet right through my heart as we're speaking right now. So I'm in Toronto at the moment, moving my daughter here, who's going to be going to school in the fall. And as we are recording this right now, my wife is off with my daughter going in shopping for the furniture and things that she needs for school while I'm here doing this. If that wasn't the case, I wouldn't even be able to be here and have this interview with you.
Well,
so
summer vacation right now. Like my wife is off is with the kids right now. If it wasn't for her, what would I do for 2 months? I had to pay for someone else to do it for 2 months, but whatever. But they're better with her than they are with someone else.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, I want to actually ask another question because you threw it out there and we kind of cruised right by it. You just mentioned briefly about cryptocurrency. It's one of those ones that is always a hot button topic. People are it's still fairly new in the world of assets, but yet some people will talk about the blockchain technology in behind it. Some people will tell you that cryptocurrency is the only place you should be investing. Forget about all the other ones. You know, can
Yeah.
you add any sort of sanity to that world?
No, there's no sanity to be added to that world. The reality is that there is no simplified argument behind all this. But let me just address one thing off the start. Define invest, right? Because the reality is that anyone basically making that argument is typically saying speculate, because there is no, when we talk investing in companies, for example, right? You have you have two different schools of thought. You have active management, where you basically try to figure out winners from losers, and you look at the fundamentals of a company. You try to figure out which one's going to do the best based on fundamentals. And then you have passive investing, which you basically are making a fundamental decision to support, to back, to say, I'm not going to pick winners and losers, but on the whole, as long as capitalism and the rest of Western societies can continue, companies can continue to make money, and that is a fundamentally sound decision, is to say that I can't pick winners from losers, right? When it
Right.
comes to crypto, there are no fundamentals, right? Like, you can argue about the caps, like you can argue all that, right? Like, but it is just the same argument behind currency and gold. It produces no income. It does nothing other than exist. Now, it is can be used for transactions, everything else. That's fine. So here's the thing. I sound like a crypto skeptic here. That's not what I am. I'm a crypto realist. So here's what it comes down to. Blockchain technology is the single most revolutionary technology to hit mankind since TCP/IP, right? So basically, since the internet was invented, this is the next watershed, because this solves for so many problems we were living with on the internet before. Okay. And I firmly believe that anything that was heavily process orientated, especially between companies, like things like cash settlements on your bank, right? Like stuff like that. At some point in the future, I'm not going to say near future, because these institutions move at a glacial pace, that everything will be settled on a blockchain. Every transaction will be settled on a blockchain to some degree, right? Public, private, different versions of it, whatever else. So that underlying technology is utterly fundamental and fantastic. Then you have the argument for currency on top of that. So can it facilitate the use of online currency? Absolutely, it could. That's what it was designed for in the first place. Great. However, currency now, could you use it as a currency? Let's face it, no one's using Bitcoin as a currency. Like, let's just, the transactional nature of it, it's very minor, right? Like, but here's what it really comes down to. And I've had this argument before. Volatility. This is the real question. Okay, volatility, which is relative. Okay, when you look at, if you're an American sitting in American dollars and you have one of the most stable currencies in the world, is Bitcoin a currency to you? Hell no, it's not. Right? Because what kind of currency are you going to have dramatic swings of 20 to 50% in very short periods of time? Right? That is not a current, that it's a currency, but it's not a currency you basically can use as a currency. Right? You can call it investment, but it's all speculation.
Yeah.
We live in Canada. I will always people will often say, well, it's too volatile for me to get into. My response is, well, like, I understand the volatility argument, but let's also face facts. I would say that a currency that goes from 65 cents to $1.10 back down to 80 something isn't exactly the picture of stability either. It may take longer, but we have to acknowledge the fact that this is relative. When you see some developing nations basically looking at utilizing crypto as an official currency, or you're seeing like cryptocurrencies being utilized as a currency there, that's partially a reflection in the lack of confidence in their ability to use their own currency, right? So it's relative. For some people, it absolutely can be. For the majority of people, it can't. But the problem is, and I don't like quoting him too often, but Nicholas Nassim Taleb went off about how he's no longer looking at this stuff because the problem is, you can't even have an intelligent discussion about this stuff online. Like, the crypto purists just try to ram it down your throat. And I had a case where I basically, it was on Twitter. It was a Twitter exchange. Someone said something about crypto, and I made a comment, and then basically someone tagged in his buddy to basically have the argument. And he's like, no, Jason, there's a difference between blockchain and Bitcoin. And my response was, yeah, I know. And I posted a link to my fintech podcast, which was like over 150 episodes in. So I'm pretty sure I know the difference, right? And then he literally turns around. He's like, great, debate me on it. And I'm like, I reply back, like, you don't even know what my stance is, and you're challenging me to a debate? And his reply was, then he started coming up. It's like, well, I guess you think that like the cap on it is stupid or whatever, something like that. I'm like, putting words in my mouth. My next response was, again, you just made an assumption. You have no idea what my position is. What the hell is wrong with you, right? Like, but that is an altercation that happens more often than not. It's like, oh, you don't believe it? I need to crush you, right? Versus like, so there's a lot of crypto believers out there that are just head in the clouds about this stuff and just want to believe it with religious zeal. Stay away from that, right? Whereas the likes of Taleb left it. The guy who created Dogecoin, I don't know if you saw this, went on a tweet storm 2 weeks ago, just destroying the concept. And basically saying, again, it's not about the soundness of the technology. That argument has merit, no problem. You want to talk about the brilliance of blockchain, the brilliance of Ether, like not a problem. You want to talk about this as an actual asset class that, it can be used as an asset class. It can be used to basically be a record of actual things that exist, both in the digital and real realm. I actually interviewed on my podcast the woman who basically developed the Mars house, the first virtual property to be sold for $700,000. Like, good on her. And all the digital art she's selling now, like that's great. I have no problem with NFTs. But here's the thing. But the problem is that the reality is that it's just rampant. It's the most rampant form of human speculation since the tulip bulb.
In the tulip bulb, oh gosh, mania in was that France?
No, it was the Netherlands.
Netherlands, yes. Yep. Okay, I would agree with you. I'm not exactly sure what's fueling it.
Greed. What else is fueling it in the grid? Like, don't get me wrong. Okay. There is a supply, there's a demand side argument, right? The demand side argument is such that, more people are finding more uses for it. And, I actually interviewed Sam Safe not that long ago. He is his company was the creator of the first Bitcoin ETF, right? So just the ability for making it easier to access Bitcoin, right? I think back to when I first found out about it back probably in 2009, my buddy was telling me about how he was mining and handling. I'm like, I'm out. This is this is what I got to go through to use it. Like, okay, fine. Right. And I think about how easy it is now, right? I can pick up my phone, done. I think, I can buy a Bitcoin ETF as part of a portfolio. It's done. It's nice and easy. So there's a demand side argument to be made about people's ability to access it. The question is, why would they access it? And they want to access it because of just rampant. There's a couple of reasons. I mean, there's speculation. There's lack of faith in fiat currency. Like, there's any number of reasons that are personal to you. That's fine. You have your personal reasons. But it's like, I liken it to the conversations I had with the people when weed was going to be legalized in Canada. The people, everyone and their cousin wanted to get in on marijuana, right? And there was and even the publicly traded companies, the projection numbers they put out on how much marijuana was going to be consumed in Canada. And I'm sitting there going like, anyone can get it already, right? Like, okay, maybe there's a pickup, but you're literally assuming that just because of this one regulatory change that suddenly everyone's going to basically see the world your way and everybody's going to start smoking it. Like, and we haven't seen the full, we saw the stock market fall out, but I don't know about you. You're in Toronto. You can't drive down the street without passing 10 weed shops, right? Like, I've literally seen weed shops. Like, it's like Starbucks used to be back in the day where you have 4 Starbucks on different corners. You're like, what's going on here? Wait until those leases come due in 5 years. They're going to be gone, right? The reality is that, when I'll get into philosophy here. The most dangerous thing in the world you can do to yourself is to want something, right? Want is the most dangerous thing. Why? Because you will convince yourself that's not want, it's need, right? Need is different. You need air, you need water, you need food, right? You need human connection. Those are things that we have proven through science. Okay. You need shelter, you need clothing. Everything else, and even tangents of that, are choices, right? And we often act like nothing Is it like we can't, oh, I had no choice but to do that? No, you always have a choice. Like short of the gun to your head, you always have a choice, right?
Right.
You choose to do something. We just don't
Yeah.
want to take responsibility for it. And the problem is that when it comes to stuff like blockchain and when it comes to stuff like what I said with marijuana, you cannot talk these people, and to a greater extent, Canadian real estate, you cannot talk reason to a lot of people because they want it to be true. They
Right.
want it desperately to be true because if it is true, it means that the outcome for them is so wildly fantastic that they have made a choice to bank their future on it to some degree. And that is dangerous because when you want desperately, you succumb yourself willfully to, when you're desperate to want something. Confirmation bias is how you live your life.
Right.
You ignore all information to the contrary and all you want to believe. Like I have this, I'm a CFA and I don't believe in stock picking. Okay. And the number of times where like, look, I talk to other CFAs and like, look, I whatever, I respect your opinion, but I still believe in this. And my response is, but belief is a psychological construct. It's not evidence, right? It's not evidence. Like, where is the evidence backing this belief? Like, I think it was in the movie Dogma, where Chris Rock's character said, I just want people to have ideas, not beliefs. People will go to war and die for beliefs, but an idea, you can discuss an idea. Right. So, Buddhist philosophy, wanting is basically the root of suffering.
Yeah,
stay
absolutely.
Away from, possible.
I think part of humanity is that the want, but I think part of perhaps maturity is learning to limit those wants, right? Choosing those wants, not unintentionally allowing yourself to be adopting wants from the media and every other source, right?
Well, I mean, I'm sure you had the same experience. Think about all the people you graduated university with, and there was a cohort who thought they were going to go out there and set the world on fire and be billionaires or whatever it was in no time. And you catch up with them 10, 20 years later, and man, have their ambitions changed. Right.
Right.
There's one solution for ambition, and it's life. Life will smack you in the face and tell you how realistic your ambition is. I mean, funny story. I think there's this one person who my colleagues worked with who, the second he got out of university, thought he was going to bring in all this business for his boss because, he went with the right frat, and that frat had a lot of CEO guys. I'm sitting there going to myself, like, you think that just because you went to the same fraternity that, the CEO of a major borderline Fortune 500 company is going to turn around and give a freshly wet behind the ears guy like all his business? There's a lot of guys who went to that frat. That's all I'm saying. And there's a lot of them who are more successful than you. And sure enough, like within a couple of years, his concept of what was successful achievement in his life had changed drastically.
Right. Absolutely. Oh, okay. So, obviously when you're younger, most men are going to want to set the world on fire. They're going to want to do this. They're going to want to do that. They've got lots of ideas in the world of finance, because you've already been down that road. Is that still an area, a field that you would recommend people to get into?
So it's interesting. The financial services industry around the world is different depending on domicile. I would say that if you were someone who's interested in the financial services industry, graduating from the U.S. and you want to help people, let's just say, I'm going to focus on financial planning, right? Because this is to me where the value is. You have a lot of options in the U.S. In Canada, we are still behind in a lot of ways. We're transitioning. So the problem is this industry typically wants to bring you in, and we don't do a good job of nurturing people. We're not like the law profession where you got an article and there's opportunities for articling, or law or medical where you have to basically do your time as a resident, right? We don't have that, right? And we've done a terrible job at succession planning as well. So here's the thing I will say. So there's a lot of, it's not easy. What I will say is this: if you want to have a career where you can literally think about this, how many jobs do this? Literally sit back and basically help people find ways to live the fullest version of their lives and have their goals and ambitions and dreams come true, and literally be the conduit for helping them achieve and self-actualize their life, then a career where you are focused on financial planning and delivery is possible. That is something we can do. Absolutely. And you can make a very good financial life, build a very good financial living off of that. You can. The problem is those opportunities are few and far between, right? The majority of the Canadian market is controlled by a disgusting oligopoly of 5 institutions that basically, as far as they're concerned, planning is a sales product. Now they're trying to move more towards it, but just I've written all kinds of articles on what's realistic in planning. Like the reality is that there's only so many people you can service over the course of a year. There's only so many people you can know deeply and actually help. If you want to build that type of career where it's very fulfilling, in my opinion, the most fulfilling aspect of this type of lifestyle, of this type of career, that is something that is a long slog that has to be built over time.
Right. Like
any other industry I've ever seen, the people who earn the most money coming out of university are the guys who who are willing to sell, because everybody is just so afraid of basically rejection by nature. We're all afraid of rejection by nature. The guys who can get past that and just focus on sales will do incredibly well. And guess what the industry looks for? The industry looks first and foremost for salespeople, right? It doesn't look for smart planners, guys who are willing to dive into tax code, all this other stuff. Can you sell? Get in here. Here's a quota. Sell your friends and family. Keep going. That's where the opportunities lie. There are a handful of opportunities outside of that through teams that have evolved to a point where they want to focus on more comprehensive and detailed planning. Those opportunities do exist, but you got to hunt for them. And I'll tell you, one of the greatest pains of my career is, and I helped start an organization called the Financial Planning Association of Canada that is hoping to long-term fix a lot of the problems in our industry and make us a true profession. But one of the things that causes me the greatest amount of pain is when I have bright young individuals who are like, I love everything you're talking about. This is the kind of career I want to have. Where do I go to start? And my heart sinks, because it's like, just start looking for any team that's hiring, and it's 50% you interviewing them to make sure it's the fit you want. But at the end of the day, you might just have to take something to just get in the industry. You might just have to do that. It's painful. It's painful to me, because I would love nothing more to be able to say, like, hey, we have a program where, these planning centric firms have all basically decided that they're going to, bring in and groom planners and train them in an apprenticeship capacity. And then from there, maybe there's an opportunity for you, or then you go off and start your own thing. That's the kind of environment we're seeing develop in the US. But in Canada, we're just not there. So I have to say, if you want that kind of career and that kind of life and that kind of fulfillment, then you got to find those opportunities. You got to hunt them out. You got to seek them out. It's not going to be easy, but it is really fulfilling when you do have them.
So that brings up something for me, because I have people approach me all the time, claiming to be, I don't know, financial coaches, some sort of financial advisor, some sort of this, that, and the other. Rarely do they make the mistake of actually using a designation. But I know that there are different organizations that are out there trying to actively train people in a second job or, their own business. You too can come in and, you can start this business without much money, and you can go in there. Now, what I've noticed about some of these organizations, without naming them, is that there are people that are legitimately care about people, as opposed to some of these other institutions where it's literally all sales driven.
Yep.
But what I do see is that there is a lack of knowledge and training for these individuals, because
where's
they're
the
doing
incentive?
It
Where's the incentive?
Right.
The incentive. So, I'm not going to, more than the majority of the banks. I'll give you an example. So, in order to be able to sell investment product, you need to have a certain course to get, licensed to do so. There were 2 avenues for this. One was the mutual funds license course. The other one was the Canadian securities course. And despite the fact that Canadian securities course has been rewritten about 3 or 4 times over the last 20 years, making it easier every time, in my opinion, the failure rates amongst the people at the branches were too high for many of these banks. So they basically moved them to, say, take the mutual funds course, which is a lower bar, right? At the end of the day, the training they give you from there, it's all to meet their purposes, right? That's all to meet their purposes, and their purposes are driven, like, they're publicly traded companies, right? You got a target to hit. That number gets permeated all the way through. Do what you got to do to hit it. If you can do good along the way, great. But and I hear a lot of young advisors who are working at the bank say, "Oh, we're doing some really positive stuff and all this other stuff." And my response is, "Great, wait for the recession. Wait for the recession when your financial plan doesn't becomes basically, something that doesn't lead to sales, right? Wait for that, and then tell me that they're committed to it, right? Because they got to hit their targets, they got to increase their dividends, right? So the reality is that there is no like, let me join this organization, and oh my God, they're going to train me to be literally in the top 1%. That does not exist in any career, period. Right? It is a ton. Let's put it this way. I spent a bunch of time, like the majority of my business at this point is specifically dealing with incorporated business owners and cross-border situations, people in the US, right? The US, there's a US CFP, which I have. Great. That was great. But explaining how these two tax codes work together and where the tricks and traps are, that was all self-learning and talking to other people in the space to learn it myself, right? The corporate stuff, there is no corporate CFP, right? Like, people are like, "Oh man, like, how do I learn what you know on this?" I'm like, osmosis and hustle. Like, you have to like work with people who know this. Every time a question comes up, where's the book I'm going to reference this so I understand the point, and have intellectual curiosity to understand the entire thing, because there is no course on this, right? So the reality is that, for all the designations I have, the knowledge that's most valuable is the stuff that I had to get outside of those, because everybody else can get those designations too, right? So the reality is, there's not a lot of training out there, and there's not a lot of desire to train these people, because training is what? It's a cost. It's a cost. It's time away from sales, right? So, I had one person I worked with who I vehemently disagreed with him on this. And he's like, I looked at that guy and he's got all these letters behind his name. And, I think, what was the cost of that? And he's talking about the cost in terms of sales. And my response every time was, no, you're failing to realize what the cost of you not having those things are. That guy, maybe he made less money for the 10-year period was accomplishing all that. But now, do you think that you guys are billing at the same hourly rate if we broke it down to that? You're delusional.
Well, so how does someone, a regular Joe, have any chance, any shot at figuring out some sort of financial planning?
Like, as a planner, or as like someone as a consumer?
As a consumer.
So, okay. So if you are someone that has, substantial or reasonable wealth, like, everybody's got different cuts, but let me just say that the odds of you finding someone to do a financial plan for you under the conventional, like, here's the thing. The planning is typically bundled for the most part with investment management and other services, right? So the odds of you finding someone to take you on a sub at a reasonable level, it's not just some sort of cookie cutter bank level thing, is like less than 250,000 is probably slim to none. Okay. So, right, maybe you find some guys starting out, but so you're probably looking at 250,000 to 500 as a starting point for getting like into the category where we can get some real service, right? Maybe there probably are some below that. But then you have, so you're starting from zero. Let's just say you're starting from zero. Your alternative is basically, there are fee-only planners that charge levels across that can be comparable to what I charge for complexity, or they will, there's some that will do very basic start-off stuff that for a reasonable price. And the thing is that people think that's unfair, but the reality is, unfortunately, wealth levels are generally a good correlation for complexity. Right? Like, if you're at this level of wealth, odds are, you probably got there through some sort of business or some sort of other thing. And that lends to all sorts of other complexity in your life. Right. If you're, I'm not getting, my wife's a teacher, so this is not me picking on, but if like you're a family of two teachers who both have pensions and you pay down your mortgage and you got a little bit of savings on the side and your kids are mature, the odds that you need that much complexity to your planning, unless one of you is an American citizen, is pretty slim. Right. Like, so there is a reason to that. Now there is a subset of the population that can't afford planning at any level, simply because they couldn't afford to spend $1,200 on a plan, for example. Right. So the reality is that how does the average Joe have it? They have to understand that there is limits depending on what they bring to the table. That's just any business, right? Like, I can't go in and buy into a McLaren dealership and expect to walk out if I don't have McLaren dealership money, right? Like, that's just that's it, right? So the reality is that, but you got to understand what your options are, which is difficult, and then you can't just take a title or a designation or anything at face value for what's going to be. There is no uniformity to how this business works across the board. Every individual advisor you have will have their own little practice. They will have their own process. They may sound a lot the same on the surface, but they can be wildly different, right? So there is a degree, unfortunately, of due diligence that has to go on the client's side. More often than not, people typically ask their friends for who they're dealing with as an advisor.
Yeah.
Unless your friends are, that's not necessarily the best way to go, quite honestly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like I actually, if you're lucky enough to know someone who, some of the examples I've seen, chief compliance officers getting asked, consultants to financial advisors getting asked, like trainers to financial advisors, like these guys who get the wholesalers in the investment business, people who get to see a large number of advisors and figure out who really knows what they're doing. You can't take your friend's, word for it, because your friend might be satisfied with a guy who's not very good. Right.
Yeah.
So you got to do your due diligence. There's lots of checklists out there for questions to ask advisors. Every advisor in the business should be willing to answer those, no problem. And you got to interview a bunch. And I would say, if you're looking for places to start, a couple of resources I'll give you. There's the Financial Planning Association of Canada website. We have a directory of members. Every member takes a pledge to act as a fiduciary. So if they don't keep your best interest at heart and you report it back to us, guess what? They're out of association. And then the Institute for Advanced Financial Planners, which is a very planning-centric organization as well. And those are the two places I typically send most people to start. But if you, whatever reason, don't meet the criteria of whoever's there or don't like what you see, FP Canada's website, which is the CFP designation, they have a directory of financial planners all across the country. But do not just assume, hey, I went to my bank and they gave me a financial planner, so I'm fine. Like, it's like saying, great, let's, you and me, let's start a hockey team and let's just pick it random out of a hat who's going to be on our team. That's going to work out well, right? Like, no, it's not. No, it's not.
Yeah.
Like, what are the odds? Yeah. The odds of me like pulling Connor McDavid's freaking name out of the hat are damn near zero, right? So the reality is that there's a like any other business, like any other industry, there is a massive deviation in skill sets, and you got to be careful about who it is you're dealing with.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you one final question.
Sure.
What are you excited about going forward?
Woo. In what capacity of my life? I don't know. What I'm excited about in my industry, let me just say that much, is that is twofold. One, there is a general global movement towards transparency, towards client digital rights, towards, I'd say, more away from sales towards service. There's a bunch of every developed country I've spoken with advisors, or developing countries I've spoken to, where people are in this industry, there's a general move towards those better principles. And I think that you extrapolate that trend over a long enough time. I mean, don't get me wrong, a lot of institutions will fight back on that. A lot of new tech companies are coming up specifically challenging, those old paradigms and basically trying to be transparent and profitable at the same time. Like, you're going to see, hopefully, I think you extrapolate that and the general populace ends up in a better place altogether. And the reality is a fair, just, accessible, mutually beneficial financial industry is paramount to the success of any nation, right? The lack of access to financial services is something that holds a lot of developed nations back. The proliferation of it is one that basically makes things, everything from starting a business to, starting a business, that's usually the big one, to starting a business to buying a home easier. Unfortunately, in Canada, we deal with a oligopoly that, frankly, I would love to break up, but it is what it is. So that's the first piece. The second piece is that Canada's largely been behind a lot of other places, but I'll specifically look at the U.S. It's, you go to a U.S. planning conference versus Canada, it's like, what magical wonderland did I walk into? Yet all the Americans are criticizing that it's not good enough, and you're just like, you have no idea what I deal with back home. And down there, you can go to a conference, you can walk the floor, you can get set up as a planner for under 20 grand. You can, with less than 20 grand of overhead, walk an exhibit floor and basically find all kinds of custodians you can put business with, all kinds of financial advisor specific technology that you can buy, like CRMs to portfolio management, to reporting tools, to whatever that you can basically buy. And then everything talks to each other. Everything talks to each other. Like, it is the ability to run your business digitally and basically automate tons of practices is just light years ahead of where we are. What excites me, and I spend a lot of time in the fintech world, and I basically, have a podcast, I consult a couple companies. what excites me is that we're starting to see that happen in Canada, but with next generation technology. What I'm seeing out of the US is a little bit is legacy, quite honestly. And a lot of what we're coming out with now is like artificial intelligence driven, and like, basically the ability to curate data in ways that basically allow for reporting that in dynamic ways that weren't possible before. And these companies are starting to work together. And so I look at where, what I deal with on a daily basis, and I think to myself of where my business will be in the next 3 to 5 years in terms of the ability to automate and standardize and better deliver outcome, and kind of just all the heavy lifting of the business, just basically reduce that and make it a button. I am super excited by that.
Wow.
Because that allows me more time to engage in the things I love, which is helping people.
Right. And it almost sounds like, the not only just the aggregation of all that information, but also being able to having it available to you through I don't know, the algorithms that really break down that information for you is really what allows you to make a better decision on behalf of your clients for whatever direction they're wanting to go and how you're wanting to improve their life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Love it. Well, listen, Jason, I know that we've reached our time. I really do want to thank you so much for coming on. We just barely scratched the scratch of the surface. And, but I do really want to thank you for all that you just shared with us and created.
My pleasure.
On the podcast today. Thank you so much for being with us.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.